Good evening, everyone. Assalamu alaikum. Thanks for all of you joining us today via Zoom and Facebook. I am Shahid Rahman, the Executive Director of American Muslim Institution, and we are now 2 years into COVID. Hopefully, this is going to be behind us in the next couple of months. But we're glad to be here with you all tonight for a great conversation featuring Muslim Americans shaping the cultural narrative. Hopefully, we can do this again in person very soon. At AMI, we have been largely focused on improving the image of Muslims. How badly is this needed? Well, in almost the last 2 decades, a study of the New York Times coverage of Islam showed that Muslims and Islam received more negative coverage than cancer. Take a moment and think about that. Over the last few years, we have worked with Muslim American journalists, young and old, to magnify their voices and to inspire the next generation of Muslim Americans to reclaim their narrative. Today, we are so excited to have 3 amazing individuals doing just that, shaping the Muslim American narrative. First, we have Sabaa Tahir joining us today. She's a best-selling author for young adult fiction in the young adult fiction category. Her book, An Ember in the Ashes, it's really doing very, very well. And we're also excited for her upcoming book, All My Rage. We're also excited to have Willow Wilson, who is currently writing for DC Comics and is known within our community, especially for the creation of the new Miss Marvel, Kamala Khan, with her co-worker, Sana Amanat. It's a great to have both of you. And finally, we have Wajahat Ali, who needs no introduction. He is an AMI advisory board member. I hope you remember that, Wajahat Bhai. He's also a recent author of Go Back to Where You Came From. And he's also a New York Times contributing op-ed writer, public speaker, and a recovering attorney. For those of you joining via Zoom and Facebook, feel free to drop your questions in the chat and we will get to them. And I'm excited to hand it over to Wajahat.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Shahid, for that awesome introduction. Thank you to Sabaa and Willow for joining us. And I know this video is going to be shared afterwards on the YouTubes. So if you guys have any questions, though, and those who are watching us, send it our way. We're going to talk for about an hour. And what we're going to do is, I think we're going to make it fun. I want to throw out 2 questions first. And then I want Sabaa and Willow, basically, we'll just take turns. So I'll throw out 2 questions and I'm gonna give it to Sabaa. Then Sabaa can ask us any question that she wants, and then Willow takes it over. And that way, because then everyone's in the hot seat. And it's one of those situations where it's amazing because Willow and Sabaa, you guys are very productive. You're fertile in many ways than one. So Willow just finished her novel. So congratulations to Willow. I think was it last night?
It was last night, yeah.
Is this the infamous watch novel? Are we allowed to ask?
I probably shouldn't say anything about it until various details are nailed down. But but if you've been following me on Twitter, then yes, this is the novel I've been talking about for the past couple of years. That would have been done a year ago,
God.
but
So
I kind
excited.
of yeah, it is. I thought it was going to be done a year plus ago, but like many parents, I kind of had to quit a large chunk of my job to become a homeschooling parent. So that delayed things by a lot. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, there was something called a pandemic, which is still ongoing. Apparently, some places it doesn't exist. And yeah, apparently, you don't need vaccines or masks. It's like utopia. But for those who don't know, oftentimes, when there are people on TV or they're writers, the people always assume it's this magical romantic life and the muse just hits you. And you're like, nope, got to pay the bills. Willow's a parent, Sabaa's a parent, and there's a pandemic. And kids don't care that you're writing a novel. They want food immediately. So you finish this novel, and some of us became addicted to Legos during the pandemic. Willow became infatuated with watches. So she just finished her novel. And then we have Sabaa, whose novel, All My Rage, very subtle, I think you could tell in the background, is coming out, I think, next week. Next Tuesday is publishing day, right?
That is correct. That's correct.
Oh, congrats, congrats.
Thank you.
Sabaa, like all of us, we're all exhausted parents during the pandemic who have published somehow miraculously books or finished books. And I think each book that's written and published, I feel like is a miracle. Like it's like a miracle of God. That anyone publishes a book and that anyone actually buys a book. It's a miracle of God. But we don't. Even if you don't believe in miracles, there are books, ladies and gentlemen. Hint, hint. that you should buy right now. So Willow has her books, Sabaa's book coming out, inshallah, next week. I wrote something that you can buy or not buy, or just, borrow from the library. But we're all authors here. And, oftentimes when you get Muslim authors, you talk about representation, you talk about Islamophobia. We could talk about all that. But the process of writing, oftentimes I've seen when it comes to writers of color or Muslim writers, when we get this very rarefied space to talk to one another, is oftentimes not talked about, just the craft of writing. And I wanted to start off with one of my two questions before I hand it off to you guys, is the superhero origin story. Like, when did you guys know? Like, when did you really know? I'm not talking about you shared it. I'm not talking about you got your first check. When did you know I might have something and I can do this? And Sabaa, I'll start with you.
So I I was about 30. I had been writing for a few years, and I had been a stay-at-home parent for about I'd been writing for 4 years, 3 or 4 years, and I'd been stay-at-home parent for 2.5 of those years. And I was on my 3,000th draft of An Ember in the Ashes, and I read it, and as I was reading it, I was like, I think this is actually kind of good, and that was the moment where I was like, oh, I think if I keep editing this and I keep working on it, I could actually get this published. So it was a really specific, and I didn't also, I'm going to save my question because I don't want to spoil it, but
Oh, wow,
but that's really when I first thought of myself as a writer. I'm
shocked by your answer. I'm shocked by your answer, because I thought the superhero origin story, you'd go to the age 14, you're in the desert. But Sabaa, for those of you who don't know, I'm sure most of you know, Sabaa's Ember in the Ashes series is like a massively, mashallah, popular 4-book YA phenomenon. She sold a book rights. So I thought you'd take us the DeLorean back to 1987. You went 10 years ago to 30. That's just mind-blowing to me.
It just took a long time. Yeah, as I was working on my draft, it took a really long time for me to think, okay, I can maybe do this. I kind of tried a million other, paths before I got there. So, but I would love to know, Willow, when did you know? Because you've been writing for a long time, not just books, but you've been writing comics for a long time.
Yeah, no, I think for me, it's really that I'm not very good at anything else.
Default,
I was
baby.
No, I mean, I was one of those kids who was constantly scribbling down, story notes and ideas for things and little drawings and things in class. So I was the kind of student who seemed like they were a really good student because I was always, over my notebook writing, ostensibly taking notes, except it was vampire fan fiction and X-Men fanfic and all this kind of stuff. So for me, it was kind of always a goal. It was the one thing that I was really, really passionate about from a very young age was storytelling. I can still remember writing my first word on a little piece of green notebook paper that my parents kept in the kitchen for, grocery lists and things, back before iPhones. And so, for me, it was, I think I did a lot of my really bad drafts of things quite young. I kind of got a lot of stuff out of my system at a fairly young age because I wrote a lot of, real garbage, as everybody does.
Rough draft, Willow, rough draft.
Rough draft. Yeah, we'll call it that. We'll call it rough drafts of things. I think because I started young, I didn't have the adult perspective of well, it really has to be good the first time because I don't have time to waste. And if it doesn't make money, then it's not worth it. I was just kind of doodling around as a teenager and a young adult. And I'm very glad that the internet was not really a thing back then.
Yes.
I'm very glad that none of that stuff is available for public consumption. Because it was, very rough drafts of things. But, by the time I was in maybe my mid-20s, I at least knew how to finish things. I think we all hit that point. Everybody who's finished a book has gotten to that point where you're about 2/3 of the way through and you're like, this sucks. it's terrible. Like I don't know how to finish it. I've set all this good stuff up and now I don't know how to make it pay off. And oh my God, what am I doing? And just being able to get to the end of something is a real challenge. Like that is a skill in itself. So I mean, I just sort of, because I never had any other ambitions really, I was able to get to that point somewhat early where I at least was able to finish stuff, to get past that brick wall that everybody hits, about 2/3 of the way through, where you lose total faith in yourself and your vision and the book and everything else. So yeah, I mean, it was a lot of practice.
When did we first meet, Willow? Because I remember we first met at Comic-Con, and I think that Comic-Con
It would have been like
13 years ago. It was when
oh my
Watchmen,
gosh,
the movie was coming out. And I remember a mutual friend said Willow Wilson's gonna be there, and she wrote Cairo. And then at that time, I think you were promoting Air for Vertigo.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
That was a Vertigo panel. Vertigo was an imprint of DC back in the day, which released great comic books. And I was just like I remember back then I was like the only openly Muslim guy there, like Comic-Con as a journalist. And then there's like one Muslim friend that I remember I came late to the panel, and then Willow clocked me because I reached out to her like a nerd. That's what I do. I always just like hunt. I used to hunt Muslims, which sounds like a terrible thing to say. I realize in this climate, but like, it's like my father used to remind. My father came post 1965, and he said back in those days, you used to walk the streets, and if you saw another brown person across the street, doesn't matter if they were Sikh, Hindu, Jain, you would literally cross the middle of the street and exchange phone numbers, right? And I always joke. I think about that now. I'm like, yeah, in my career, starting off, that's what I used to do with brown and Muslim writers. I used to like actively hunt them on social media, make them befriend me. And I think that's what I did with Willow. I'm like, Willow Wilson, you should know me. And she goes, okay, random person. So we met. And at
Comic-Con. Who else was there? Sana was there too. That's where I met Sana. She wasn't working at Marvel at that point. She was working for another, small publisher. But it was like, oh, you're the yes, and you're the okay, yes. So it was like, yeah, the three Muslims at Comic-Con.
And at that time, did you feel like, the reason I'm asking that is I think that was your mid-20s, and you had just finished a graphic novel. Did you feel at that time I'm a writer, or was it still? And you were still, I mean, you were invited to Comic-Con. You were like,
yeah, no, I felt like, I felt like, I had imposter syndrome for sure. I thought it was kind of a fluke maybe, that, okay, I did it once, but that doesn't mean that I can do it continuously, because that's another big hurdle to get over. Because I think there are a lot of great writers who had one book in them.
Wajahat was just talking about that. He was like,
oh,
I'm
really?
just doing the one book.
Just the
I was
one
like,
book.
when's your next book? And I'm like, I think I'm done. I'm just gonna retire and just sit. There's nothing left. No, but what's interesting is you guys since have been so prolific, right? So Willow, I met her first when she was a graphic novelist, and then she wrote a memoir, and then she wrote a fiction, a novel, and then Sabaa started off with this YA fictional 4 books, and then she just came out with All My Rage. And what's interesting is, even though All My Rage isn't a memoir, based on what I know of you, Sabaa, and based on what you've written, it's like, is it safe for me to say it's like a fictionalized, perhaps exaggerated version of what what you went through?
No. I don't. I think it's more solidly fiction. So I would say that it is inspired by my childhood, but it is not based on it. Yeah, it's inspired by my childhood. But there's a whole section about a drug dealer in there. That was officially that I did not do any of that.
No, but yeah, officially, I like to looking at it like, yes. I'm me Abu watching. I did not do that. My friends did that. No, but it's a remarkable shift, right? So you go from YA fiction, and then I'm reading this book, and I'm like, this is totally different from Ember in the Ashes. Like, how do you decide as a writer to make that leap and make it so successful? Which you have, mashallah.
I don't think I decided it. So I started writing this book about the motel where I grew up when I was in my early 20s, because my parents had sold the motel, but I didn't get a chance to kind of go see it before they sold it. So I think I needed closure. So I started writing about it, but I didn't have the wisdom as a 22 or 23-year-old or however old I was to really write about this place that sort of is filled with ghosts and memories. And so I kept working on it, here and there as I finally transitioned to fantasy and writing fantasy books. And I just kept working on it. And it wasn't really a book that I ever thought would see the light of day. I think that's why I was able to write it. Actually, I don't think I could have written something that is so emotional, and that does draw from my own life if I had thought it was ever going to get published. So it took, and then it was in 2017. I knew somebody who overdosed on fentanyl, and they were someone from my own community, Pakistani community. And it hit really hard. And that's when I really started thinking about like how to shift the story and make it something that was publishable and worthy of being read by other people. So it was a 15-year journey, and it was a very accidental transition. I do feel like in general, my writing career has been like me tripping into stuff and being like, oh, okay, well, I guess I'll work on this thing now. And then I work on it and I'm like, oh, I have a book.
That's like all of us, I think. I mean, that's
yeah.
Before we go on, I'm going to take a liberty. I said 2 questions, but I'm going to do 2A questions. And before I give it over to you, and then we're going to do free for all. But if you don't mind sharing with people, you have like a really unique. You don't have the typical first generation Pakistani American story. Like, you literally grew up in the Mojave Desert, and it was you and your parents in this strange motel in the middle of nowhere, and your parents did not have like expertise or dreams to run a motel. They fell into it by fate because they had to. And then you grow up as the token brown kid and the token Muslim kid in an environment where no one else looked like you. Oh, by the way, while also learning how to live in a motel and manage a motel.
Yeah, it was a very strange experience. I think there's probably my oldest brother and I write together, and we often talk about how there's just 1,000 stories we could tell just because we grew up at this motel, right? Because there's so many weird and crazy things that happen there. And this town, which was a very strange little town. I mean, it's still out there in the desert. I don't usually talk about what it's called just for the privacy of the people who live there, but like it is this very odd little, not little, it's actually a medium-sized like town. But you were talking about how your father said, hey, when in the 60s, when you saw a brown person, you like cross the street. Yeah. I was the same in college. I was so shocked at seeing fellow brown people in college and fellow Muslims in college. I actually had no idea how to interact with them. I was like, I don't know. And they were always they just had these huge brown crews around them. And I was like, oh my God, like, I don't know how to interact with this crew. So it's only in my 30s and 40s that I actually ended up finding a group of Muslim Pakistani friends, like it took a long time because that wasn't my experience growing up.
I was the same way in college, by the way. Like when I saw Muslims in college, I'm like, I'm no longer the token. And then I went to a hijabi woman who was sitting there at the MSA table, and just pure sincerity just shows you how nutty Muslims were back in the day. I'm like, I'm Wajahat Ali, Assalamu alaikum. And she looked like my hand. She looked like my hand was COVID. She was repulsed. And she goes, astaghfirullah. I'm like, what did I do wrong? Oh no. But it's interesting that we had that similar, like we were oftentimes a token. We were so excited to see Muslims. Willow, I'm going to throw it to you. And then Willow, then you have to ask a question, any question you want. When it comes to the writing process, right? You have written a memoir, and I've written a memoir-ish thing, and you write fiction. And you didn't have to write your story as a memoir. This was a story called In Butterfly Moss, where you talk about you went to Egypt, why you went to Egypt, why you then became Muslim, your marriage, like the how you learned how to pick your own chicken and then skin the chicken and cook the chicken, and like all of it. It's like this hipster girl, well, goth hipster girl, I guess you could say, from Colorado, right? Boulder.
That's where my parents lived. My early childhood was spent in New Jersey, so I'm bi-coastal, bi-regional. I don't know.
but why choose I want to ask about this. Why choose the memoir as that vehicle? And do you regret it? Because so many people have written memoirs, told me, man, I wish I just went back and wrote fiction. I would do everything the same, and I would just change the characters and it'd be fiction.
Yeah, no, I'm one of those for sure. No, like at the time, when I was writing that, we were only a year or two out from 9/11, and it was just chaos. It's amazing to me now, talking to like younger comic book readers and stuff, and just sort of younger readers in general who are in their teens, or even very early 20s, who do not remember 9/11. They grew up after 9/11. And so like this world is like the default for them, the normal. But you know, in the few years after 9/11, it was just chaos. It was so terrible. And the, you know, like the level of visceral hatred and propaganda and you know, like institutional anti-Muslim sentiment, you know, things that were so like just made up and you know, like crazy that anybody ever believed them. All of this was in the atmosphere.
Right.
And I, you know, I was living in Egypt at the time, and I was writing like these long emails home to friends and family. I mean, this is like pre Substack, you know, like pre Medium. We actually wrote emails back then, actual emails from one person to another. And it was a friend of mine who was like, why don't you put all of this together into a book? It might be really useful. You know, at this particular juncture in history, I feel like we really need something like that. And so I thought, okay, what the heck? And so I did that. It was, you know, a lot of that stuff started out as emails, and I kind of put them together and rearranged them into sort of a book format. And it caught the attention of an agent in New York. But I think, you know, we've all learned in sort of the 20 years post all of that, that there's no story you can tell that will change the minds of certain people.
Yeah.
It just doesn't exist. It does not exist. So it's a lot of exposure, and, you know, like, it's a lot of exposure. It's a lot of, you know, sort of like painful reckoning in public for, I think, oh my God, Waj, I shouldn't be saying this in front of you. You're like putting out, you know, a memoir, but I have to say, I think yours is better thought out than mine was. And it takes a very different shape. But yeah, I mean, like, it was sort of a difficult lesson to sort of realize that, like, it doesn't matter, you know, like there's people who know it's all made up, who know they're spouting nonsense, who are purposefully causing division, and nothing you say is going to change their mind because they're not acting in good faith to begin with. So their mind is not going to be changed by a good faith argument.
Or a good story.
Or a good, yeah, it doesn't matter. So yeah, I mean, like, if I had to go back, I'd just be like, just skip it. You know, like, leave it in the DMs, leave it in the inbox.
Leave it as an email, put it on Substack.
Put it on, yeah, leave it on Substack. But you know, I was very young. I'm older now.
I will share a story before I give it over to Willow to ask a question. When Willow was doing her Butterfly Mosque tour,
oh, I know where this is going.
She was in the Bay Area, and I was like, so your publisher, you know, did they give you extra money? She goes, well, they did, like, for one day. I'm like, you should just, but then I got to find places to stay. So I'm like, oh, you have all these fans. Well, why don't you just stay at my parents' home? And I was a grown man, completely broke. This was, I think I was 28, and I was living with my parents, and they were like, Willow, why don't you stay with us? And my parents are like, yes, Willow Wilson. And my parents just fed her. And they were just so happy because she ate like everything that, like, my mom
everything
ate.
in sight.
And
but there was a reason.
They were so happy. My mom was like, this is so impressive. This white convert to Islam just devours our food. And, like, they just kept feeding her. And they're like, stay as long as you want. I remember the whole scenario was very funny because then I moved downstairs and slept on a cot. And then you moved to my room. We're all grown adults living in, like, my parents' home. My mom's making us kana food every day. And then later on, Willow goes, I gained X amount of weight because of you and your family, but there's a good reason for it. Like, she literally said, because, like, even your doctor was like, how did you gain so much weight so quickly? Like, what happened to you in Fremont? And then the story is that you were,
I was pregnant. But it was really early, so I wasn't telling anybody. I hadn't even told my publisher. But yeah, I was starving all the time. It was my first baby. So I didn't know how anything worked. You know, all I knew is that I was, like, completely ravenous at all times. I would, like, travel around with, like, energy bars in my purse.
My family, there's a word I'll translate. Bichari means poor girl. They're like, Bichari doesn't eat. Like, they don't feed her in Seattle. We have.
Oh my God, it was ridiculous. But, like, I will forever be thankful to your parents during that time period because they didn't judge.
Yeah, no, they weren't happy. They were ecstatic that this white girl who converted to Islam is, like, happily eating every day. See, like, hard, because they didn't neuter the kana for.
No, it wasn't. Yeah, it was
like pure.
Yeah, no, it was great. I still to this day remember like it was like a mint chutney or something. Anyway, it was like the most exquisite like chutney
Pudina
I
ki
had ever
chutney,
had in my life, and I've
pudina ki
tried to
chutney.
replicate it. I've tried to replicate it many times and failed.
All right, you're up.
All right. So I wanted to ask, well, I mean, there's a question kind of for both of you. We can maybe start out with you, Wajahat, because you haven't been in the crosshairs yet. And then Sabaa can answer it also. But I think, you know, you, Waj, you've written a lot of stuff sort of in short form, you know, op-eds, things, you know, sort of more journalistic pieces. And now you've written a whole book, you know, parts of which are quite personal. And Sabaa, you've talked about this a little bit, that you, and I thought your answer was very interesting because it reminded me of a lot of my own experiences where you sort of get an idea for something 10 years before it becomes a reality and people think it's a huge shift and you're like, actually, this is the book I wanted to write all along. But, you know, I know that you've built up a fan base of dedicated sci-fi fantasy fans, you know, who are used to a certain kind of book from you. You know, and I'm wondering from both of your perspectives, and maybe Waj, we can start with you. What's it like making that pivot and thinking, oh, please, you know, like trying to get your readers to come with you, to kind of trust you with new material, a new format, a new genre that you maybe haven't done before? You know, is it scary? Is it, you know, just what has it been like trying to bring those readers from those other genres that they're used to with you as you move into a different genre?
No, that's a good question. I don't have delusions of grandeur that I even think I have fans, right? So I live in, I mean, in all seriousness, I live like I have 3 kids, which might as well be 300 children during a pandemic, right? And so you live your life, and it's not lost upon me because we've been doing this longer than a hot minute that your words translate. I've been very lucky to travel around the world, and then people come up to me and they say, "Oh, you wrote this article. I saw your play." And I'm like, "Wow, look at that! Who would have thought?" But then at the same time, you get to a certain age, and I think, you know, I always joke with people. They say, "Well, how long did it take you to write the book?" And I made a vow to finish the first draft of the book before my 40th birthday. So my birthday was in November. I started writing in August. I finished it a week before in like October. I cranked it out. And even my editor was like, "This is remarkable because this is a high quality first draft in like 2.5 months." And then she goes, "How'd you pull it off?" And like, and the real answer is it took me 40 years to write the book, because the
That's
story,
good because you were going to get nuzzard.
yeah, I was gonna get another, but this, because the story's always been there, right? And there's a recurring thread. I'm just listening to you and Sabaa, is oftentimes we don't have confidence in our own stories, and we don't have confidence in the value of our stories, especially if you're a woman or a person of color, because you've internalized being the other, being subordinate in the mainstream culture, right? So oftentimes, even when I started writing Domestic Crusaders, I joke about this often, is the people, even, I would get standing ovations, and there would always be Desi uncles and aunties afterwards. He goes, "Yeah, but what do the people think? What do the people? Oh, the people like it. Oh, it's good. Okay." And so for me, I made a conscious decision early on in my career when like I started actually thinking maybe I could be a writer, like my late 20s, that, you know, when I was given this advice repeatedly, you have to write for the mainstream. Don't make it so ethnic. Translation: "Hey, darky, white people might be scared by all this mirch and masala and pudina ki chutney that you just mentioned in Islam." And I just said, like, I'm just gonna write what I want to write. And there's a fear there, because will you be accepted by the mainstream, in which you don't see mentors? You don't have, you know, you people, when we were starting out, like, you were a young writer, Willow, like just trying to make it and survive. Like, you know, Sabaa was 30 when she was writing Ember in the Ashes before it was a big hit. Like, we still don't have really that type of representation, clout, mentorship. You know, it's still a struggle to this day, where like we're talking with Hamla, the success that we have, there's still hesitation in our voices, right? Which is wild to me. Like, this is not, white men would not have this. They're like, "I wrote a book, it was dope, it was awesome, I should have been a bestseller." But we're like, maybe it'll go away. And so I think with this book, I got to an age, it was the pandemic, I was about to turn 40. You know, my daughter survived cancer, and just something happens. You're like, life is short. I have the wounds, I have the scars, I've proven myself. If people like it, great. If they don't like it, that's fine. I'm gonna play in my corner of the playground, and you can come play with me or you don't, and that's fine. And I remember I wrote this at the top of my draft, and I sat there and I read it every day. I wrote this. I said, "Write what you want, how you want, and have fun writing it, or else what's the point?"
Mhm.
And I sat, that was like my North Star every day when writing this. And I feel like I did it. And, you know, it's the universal is often found in the specific. All the mirch and the masala and the Urdu and the Urdish, that people love it. And like the response, it's been 1 month now. The response I've gotten is exactly what I intended, is a diverse audience is like, we love this story. And the specificity of the story is what, it's an entryway for different people, right? So some people are like, I connected with you wearing husky pants, left-handed, children of immigrants, ESL, jail, mental health. And it's a good reminder for people of color, for Muslims, that lean in to the vulnerability, the scars, the wounds, but also lean into everything that makes your story unique and rich.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I mean, that's great advice. But you can't be somebody except you, like it's what makes you is what makes your perspective valuable. And I think that certainly comes through in your book, Wajahat, because it is, like, especially as somebody who knows you, it's that comes through, like the real Wajahat jumps out.
For better and for worse.
But no, I mean, it's
Yeah,
just,
mostly
you
for
can hear
better.
that voice. You can hear the voice. So what about you, Sabaa? Like, are you at all nervous about making that shift? Do you was it something that you sort of had to like chit chat and have meetings about, or is it just sort of like, what, as Waj said, you put what you want out there, and the audience comes or it doesn't, and really the point is to write the book that you want to write.
My so I've been with my agent that I have now for nine years.
Right.
And she had said to me early on, with both books, with both projects, with both Ember and this, you have to believe. You have to believe in the power of your own words. You're not gonna, you're not going to get anywhere unless you have the guts to believe in what you've written. So I sort of always come back to the people who need the book will find the book, I think. Ember was something that, it had, it found its audience over time, right? It was very successful right away, which is wonderful, but it sort of rose up and then kind of went quiet. And then it was just slowly building up this audience over the course of years. I wrote a second book and people were like, oh, you're not a one book wonder, right? You've written a really good second book. Maybe I'll stick to this series. But then you have to stick the landing on every single book, right? And so then it was about, okay, now let me, so I think that I've been fortunate in that I've had readers who've stayed with me for 4 books, and so they trust me now as a storyteller.
Mm-hmm.
And whatever story I'm telling, they trust that I will do the best I can telling that story, and tell it as honestly as possible. So with All My Rage, really what I wanted to do was just tell a story honestly. Tell a story of these 2 kids who are just going through the worst time. like every time you think that things will get a little bit better for them, something else hits, because I remember that feeling as a young person.
Yeah.
I remember feeling like, okay, I'm almost there. I've almost got it. And then something else, you get hit by another wave and it's just like, oh my God, when is this going to stop? Right. And I think a lot of people identify with that right now.
Mm-hmm.
Like right now, I've had so many friends, who will reach out and say, I can't take one more thing. And then, we have this war that's going on right now. Right. And they're just like, oh my gosh, like, and you don't want to ask the question, like, what else can happen? Because you don't want to tempt fate. Right?
That's right.
You don't want to be like, you don't want to invite disaster. But it really is something that these kids are dealing with, and I believe that even if it's not a fantasy story, even if it's not, there's no magic, there's no djinn, there's nothing like that. I do think that eventually, whether it's now or later, the kids and adults who need this book, it will find its way to them.
And the book already has been very successful. So Sabaa is being super humble, but has, mashallah, really good reviews, and they're anticipating that it's good. It's going to do well. So it's going to find a lot of people. So.
No, it's super exciting.
All right, Sabaa, you're up.
Okay, so my question is extremely serious, but it's something that I really love asking other authors, which is, do you guys have like a specific writing setup or like where you're like, okay, I have to have these snacks and I have to have these headphones and I have to be in this space, like, or can you write from anywhere and with anything? I need chocolate personally and my headphones. Those are like my two, like I must have both or there will be no work.
What was the other one?
Curious.
You said chocolate and what else?
And my headphones.
Okay.
Like for music. Yeah, I need both of those.
So are you actively listening to music while you write?
I almost the only time I don't listen to music in the writing process is when I am reading hard copy pages and I'm doing edits. That's the only time where I'm like, I have to read it out loud, and then you can't really listen to music.
Before answering your question, can I ask you, do you have a specific playlist for each book, or do you go back to the same music?
Yeah, no, I have these massive playlists. I mean, the Ember playlist must have like 150 songs on it, and
wow.
Torch has its own. Every book has its own place, and with All My Rage, I was actually able to like incorporate the playlist into the story, which was like my
wow.
dream as like a music nerd. I was like, yes. So playlists are a big part of the story. And now, like when I hear a certain song, I'll just go back to like, oh, I was writing Ember, the last time I was listening to this. So.
Willow, you go first.
Oh gosh,
I wow people with my craft.
With your craft, I sort of taught myself to be able to write anywhere, kind of out of necessity. Like I didn't have a dedicated desk until, my gosh, maybe just before the pandemic. Like I'm at it right now, and it's not even like a real desk. I'd turn it around, except I don't know that would work really well. It's a Murphy desk. It like folds out of the wall.
Oh, it folds down. Yeah.
Because I'm writing in a room that is like, sometimes it's my office, sometimes it's a guest bedroom. Like if my husband is snoring really bad, I'll sleep down here. Like the kids play in here. It's a multi-purpose room. And when I was really young and sort of newly married, and we were in this like tiny little apartment in Cairo, I wrote at the table. I wouldn't even call it the dining room table because it was the only table. There was only one table. So I sort of, I have this dream that like one day I'll live in a place where I'll have like a dedicated office that's not an office / guest bedroom / whatever. But I just haven't had that yet. And so I kind of trained myself over the years to be able to tune things out. And then of course, you guys know, as parents, there are a non-zero number of nights or days when you're writing with a colicky baby, on one hand, because like you finally got them to sleep and this is going to be the only quiet hour you have in the whole day. So like I've written like that. I've written at the hospital when my younger daughter was born with a heart defect, and spent some time in the hospital having that corrected. And so I've written at hospital bedsides. So yeah, but that's not my preferred modus operandi. Like one day I would like to have what kind of the great men of history had, like where it's like, this is the office and this is the window and you write at this particular time of day and all of this stuff. But
you have an engraved pen.
An engraved pen, like some nice person bringing you cups of tea, all of that stuff. But yeah, so far, no dice, but yeah, so wherever I can make it work, I make it work.
So this is the way to do it. There's only one way for those aspiring writers who are listening to this, which is the following. You write whenever you can. So to answer your question, I wish I could show you the table in which I wrote like half of the book, because it's like right to my left and there's Legos everywhere. I have like 3 kids, all right, and my kids are jinns. They don't sleep. They're just freaks. Like we've done everything to get them to sleep. They're like these hyper joyful, energetic kids who do not sleep. They sleep like it. If we didn't put them to bed, like they'd go till 11 p.m., right? So I have to wait like till 11 p.m., right? You put them to bed, you handle some business, you do some chores, and finally you get this window like late at night where it's like quiet. The only time I have quiet. And that's when I can like really do like hardcore, like I could crank out pages, right? And then throughout the day, you find wherever you can. One time I wrote this article in 28 minutes in the back of a car because I had to. And I was not driving. So there you go. And so sometimes, you have to crank out the deadline. And like the hospital, when my daughter was sick, I had to write an article there. But for this particular book, what I've realized with the pandemic is, and this is for writers, right? They always assume non-writers or people want to write, they assume the following, that there's some romantic alchemy that is needed. So Sabaa has her chocolate and her headphones. I don't consider that to be a romantic alchemy of like things that come together. She just likes her chocolate. She needs those endorphins, and she likes the music. I also like writing the music sometimes. It puts me in a mood. Specific music puts me in a specific mood to write a specific scene. But writers write. The muse does not come. It does not come gently into the night, wafting through with like, you know, like oud, and saying, oh, come, I have now a chapter for you to write and put on the page.
You have to like drag it out of its like bed and be like, coming out.
It's like you drinking chai, putting the kid to sleep. You're like, I will watch Netflix. You're like, no, I have pages. There's a deadline. Then you turning on the computer, like, why didn't I become a doctor? And then you just cranking it, and then you crank it out, and sometimes it's just crap, right? And then you're like, I just need my words, and you get your words out there, and then you later on say, okay, I got the words. You feel better about yourself. It's usually better on the page than it is in your head. And the process of writing, because we're storytelling logical animals who do illogical things, oftentimes there is a narrative that comes out even as you spew it out without you realizing. So that to me was the process, right? Is like the kids go to sleep. I have the laptop usually burning on my thighs in the couch. Or if I want to be a civilized human adult, I go sit at some form of a desk, and then I take multiple jaunts to eat stuff I shouldn't eat, and I end up gaining weight. And then I end up going down like the Wikipedia rabbit hole, just to like free my brain. And then after 4 hours, where you should have written 3,000 words, you have 1,000, you're happy. But what I did do, and I was proud of this, is for the book, and because of kids, you can't half-ass it. I could probably half-ass it because we don't have times in the day. Like, we just don't have hours. Oftentimes when Willow and I used to talk back in the day, if she remembers, she's like, I have 2 hours. I have 2 hours. I have to do the dishes. I have to do the laundry. I have to take care of the bills, and I have to write. Now I have to decide, what do I do in what order? And then you just become like these machines, right? You're like, your brain just becomes like, I have 2 hours. I got to crank it, which is also a blessing because it takes you outside of your head sometimes. And oftentimes I've seen writers, what they say, and this happened to me also, is, inshallah, I'll write. Inshallah, I'll write. I'll wait for that perfect moment. And what you realize in life is that perfect moment, as you were saying, Sabaa, doesn't happen. Because once the crisis ends, another crisis happens. And oftentimes that's called life. So that's the answer to your question. Now it's my turn. Shahid, introduced us by talking about representation and how do you represent Muslims. And by the way, guys, throw in your questions. We will get to them. I see there's 2 questions already. But oftentimes when it comes to marginalized communities or communities who aren't represented, or communities who don't have heroes, or communities who aren't seen as protagonists of the American narrative, there is a pressure put upon those who are writers from those communities or storytellers that we have to tell the perfect story, or we have to tell every story. And in that story, our people have to be heroes. Smile with your white teeth showing, everything's perfect. Oftentimes you have to do dawah, like literature as dawah, because that's the only utility. And those oftentimes make for, in my opinion, boring stories, and stories that reek of inauthenticity, that do not find the audience that Sabaa was talking about, because people are like, this is bullshit. I can smell it a mile away. Mm-hmm. And often those stories, and I touched upon it, with the vulnerability and the pain, and Sabaa, in your book, you have a trigger warning in the beginning of your book of all this imperfect stuff. And Willow, in your graphic novels, I've seen, I don't know if you don't, I hope you don't mind me saying this, I've seen, especially in what you do with Dark Horse Comics, you're taking more of those risks, going into those dangerous territories that maybe Willow from 10 years ago would not have done, because it would not have been seen as the appropriate Muslim-y thing to do. And in my book, I talk about, I don't know, the stuff that happened in my family, like incarceration, poverty, friggin' all of it, like all of it happened. And the question I have for you then is are we doing ourselves a disservice oftentimes when we're not telling the true story that is often filled with crisis, heartbreak, shame, pain, and all the stuff that we don't say because log kya bolenge, what will people say? And I throw it out to you, Sabaa, before going out to Willow.
Yeah, I do think we do ourselves a disservice, but I think more importantly, we do the people we write for me specifically, young people, a disservice, because we're lying to them. If we tell these stories where it's just, filled with perfection, first of all, boring. And second of all, it's a lie, because that's not really how life is. And anyone who has lived any type of life will be able to say that's not real, right? I also think, like, I'm not at all saying that there isn't a space for books about Muslim joy and about Muslim love. I think, for example, Sajda Ali wrote Love from A to Z, which is like a beautiful Muslim romance, right? And I think that there are absolutely spaces for books like that. And we need more books like that, that really are not about sort of the struggle of being Muslim, but about just sort of like the funny daily, like I want more Muslim romantic comedies, like I think those are wonderful. I think that in any diaspora group or group of marginalized group of people, what you want is just a wide variety of stories, right? So I actually just posted about this on my social media about how All My Rage is not the everyman's book, right? Like I've had people write to me and say, oh, I'm so excited to see Pakistani rep in a YA book. Do you think this book will be for me? And the answer is like, I don't know. I don't know you. So I don't know if the book is for you. I know one person that the book is for, and that's me. I wrote the book for me. And so I think it's very important for us to also support different types of Muslim creators, right? Like there are people who are doing comedy, there are people who are doing romance, there are people who are doing, comic books, there are writers who are doing nonfiction, writers who are, are journalists, and they're only doing journalism. And I think that for us to really be able to create a Muslim narrative that is as rich as the actual Muslim people, right? We just need more and more and more stories, and we need to encourage, more true stories of all kinds.
Good answer. Willow, you're done. You're tapped out. You're like
no. I was just waiting to see what you wanted me to say. No, I mean, like, I think everything that Sabaa said is true. I think we're very lucky right now to be in the middle of what is functionally a renaissance of Muslim literature in English. Like if you go back 10 years, 15 years, it was really few and far between. And now, like there are fantasy series, there's slice of life stuff, there are graphic novelists, there are playwrights. It's just been this huge flowering of talent across many different genres, telling a lot of different kinds of stories, which is amazing. Like for me, for me, it's a huge relief. It's a giant relief, because I think when I started writing, I was in sort of a weird position in that, like I was Muslim and like everybody was on some kind of list, and navigating that whole, sort of post 9/11 reality. But like I'm a convert, I'm a white girl. I did not grow up as Muslim. I don't come from a diaspora community, even I might socialize in one in my local community and at the masjid and stuff, but that's not sort of my family story or history or anything like that. And it was a very awkward position to be in, because I was and am conscious of the fact that like there's stuff that I am simply not a good ambassador for. And like when Sana and I were doing Ms. Marvel, and it got unexpectedly huge, and it was going to be a 10-issue miniseries, and that became this whole big thing. I'd get emails and calls and things being like, hey, like we've got this like Palestinian character in this other project. Do you want to come on and write them? And I'm like, I don't think that's a good idea. Like, I'm happy to put you in touch with some Palestinians, but like Palestinian is not synonymous with Muslim. They're Christian Palestinians. They're who are very prominent in the in the movement for Palestinian rights. It's it's an ethnicity and a place, not a religion. And so I ended up diverting a lot of resources and being sort of like, like I'm fairly certain, or a lot of sort of generalized diversity resources. I'm being like, I'm fairly certain that these were not meant to go to exotic varieties of white people, as appreciative as I am. So I ended up doing a lot of that, sort of gently redirecting, like, hey, like you might want to get in touch with these people or this organization, because I was conscious of the fact that I'd sort of ended up in this position by accident.
Mm.
You know, and especially given the way that sort of the politics of the way that Islam is politicized post 9/11 have played out, it's become, you know, I think sort of anti or Islamophobic discourse has become a problem that before anything else is racial, right? Because you can be a complete atheist, you know, drinking liquor, having girlfriends and whatever, but if you are brown skinned and your name is Muhammad, you are a suspect. And on the flip side of the coin, you can be, you know, like Sikh or Jain or Hindu or whatever. And if you've got a turban and you have a brown skin, you're assumed to be Muslim, even though you're not Muslim. Because it's you know, it sort of reduced itself to the lowest common denominator of our society, which sadly has a substantial racist element. And so, you know, like I didn't ever want to be in a position where I felt like I was, you know, yeah, I'm just not. I think converts, especially of my vintage during the age of big dawah, which doesn't really exist anymore,
Big dawah.
are not great. Yeah, not great ambassadors for the religion, because we're from a very specific time and space. You know, like it was a very evangelical era where it was sort of like a very different vision of what Islam is than what exists today.
And we
And
all grew up in that, in the college, like around the
yeah,
same age. It's been a remarkable shift
and
where
now it's like, whoa, we don't know. We don't know about this whole like conversion thing, or it's considered bad manners. You know, like you don't want to go out and convert people because it's insulting to them to sort of suggest that your religion might be better than theirs or whatever.
But it connects to what Sabaa was saying, is that it was like a monopoly on the narrative of this thing called Islam and
Yeah.
the thing called Muslim community, and what within the community you had to be in order to be a good Muslim, which is not reflective of the truth or our communities or our narratives. And the only way to really represent that, which is also very threatening to a lot of people who just feel like the center cannot hold, you know, we have to maintain this vision of Islam and Muslims, because if we expand it and show what actually exists in all its diversity and beauty and ugliness, maybe all things will fall apart, right? And also it shatters the model minority myth, which is something that should be shattered. That apparently, you know, all Desis that come here, all people of color, all Asians that come here, they're happy and they're smiley and they're shiny. And then Sabaa's story shows, oh wait, that's not a model minority myth. They struggled. They're in the Mojave Desert. Not every South Asian or Muslim that comes here, even with education, right? And so it kind of flattens it and blows it up, but we need to do that in a figurative way. But I remember that model minority myth, and I'm going to combine some of these questions in the next 8 minutes that we have, is it gives you a checklist of success, especially for those who are Asian and South Asian. That in that checklist of success, writer was never there. And it's still not there, right? It's a doctor, engineer, business, maybe post 9/11 lawyer. I never heard lawyer pre 9/11 because they were all seen as like these shady immigration lawyers, but like post 9/11, you got corporate lawyers, right? But like the fifth option was failure. And the reason why I mentioned that is, in going to a question, you know, we had to hunt and find each other because there were so few of us, right? There was no infrastructure. There were just, even mainstream examples of success were so rare. And there's one question that we got where, you know, you are all prominent Muslim American writers, maybe, that are shaping American culture. Now, do you see a strong pipeline of American Muslims who are entering writing? And how do we strengthen and support that pipeline if it exists? Sabaa.
I do think that there are more Muslims entering writing. I think that the best thing that we as established writers can do is mentor and support scholarships and support. I mean, there's a few that I'm thinking of. There's a Highlights Fellowship that I'm actually a mentor for, that is for Muslims. It is Muslims who are writing and who want to be published, and it's like a 2-year fellowship. And that's something that has allowed me to work with 3 specific Muslim authors and give them insight into publishing or
Great.
into like that sort of thing. And then there's stuff like the Islamic Scholarship Fund, which focuses primarily on supporting writers, creators, people who want to move into the political arena, and giving funds to these young people, usually college about to graduate, or undergrads, who are working in these spaces where you don't generally see as many Muslims, right? So I think it is really about trying to support the young people who are coming into these spaces and be there for them as a mentor, as as a resource to turn to, always, right? So one thing that I found in the young adult community is that it is so opaque sometimes, like what expectations are and what does distribution mean and what does it mean if your advance is this much and what does it mean if your publisher says this to you. And so I have really tried to be very as open as humanly possible with other young Muslim writers to say, like, hey, whatever you need, if there's any question I can answer, just ask and I will try to answer it for you. That type of support within the community is, I think, the best way to create a pipeline. I don't know if I would say there's like drips and drabs. Like sometimes there's more and sometimes there's less. But to be fair, I mean, right now, even within the young adult space, I can think of 20 authors who are Muslim, who are writing about Muslims, and they're all from different backgrounds. They're all writing different things, at least 20, probably more like 30 or 40 if I really sat down and thought about it. So that to me is a symbol of hope.
And also Sabaa was very helpful to me, encouraging me to get off my butt. And like, she sent me texts and then she said, have you done it yet? Have you done it yet? Have you written the draft? And sometimes that's all it takes. I said this in the book, but I'll say it again. Sometimes all it takes is one person in your life to say the following: you have something. You should consider writing that down. That's all it takes. It's the wind that lifts the sails. We have 4 minutes left. And Willow, I wanted to throw this question to you. Someone has written, you've written about the need for Muslim superheroes or finding our Muslim superhero within. I have a chapter in the book. Can you guys speak to the importance of having Muslim heroes?
That's a great question. I think, especially in an age where we're all sort of very literally superhero mad, every time you turn around, there's a new superhero movie coming out. Sometimes there's like multiple reboots of the same thing. So I think there's a real hunger at a time when nothing is black and white, everything is gray, everything is morally gray. Everybody's finding out that their real life heroes have feet of clay. I think there's a real hunger for someone who is not only good in some real sense, which doesn't mean that they don't struggle, but who will always try to do the right thing, even if they're not entirely certain what it is, and who also has a unique power set that allows them to do that. I think people are feeling quite powerless given the political, economic, social turmoil that's going on right now. And so these symbols have come to have a real weight that they might not have in a time of, greater prosperity or stability or unity. And so we're looking for those things in fiction in ways I think we might not have before. So I think that, having those heroes who, come from a religious background that is taboo is important, because I think there's a lot of, there's still a lot of counter pressure, like people are still fighting this outward influence that tells them like, oh, like maybe you're a good person, but your religion is satanic or terrible. Or,
They said that
like
to you. I mean, people, Willow has crazy stories that she probably forgets, but like in all the stories in mainstream spaces where once they find out we're Muslim, they say stuff to our face. We're like,
you're like, I cannot believe that those words exited your mouth. Oh yeah. Oh, it's bad. Yeah. Like when they think that there's no downside, like when they think nobody's listening, people will say things that would curl your hair. So, I think having those heroes helps resist that pressure from the mainstream that tells you that like your religion is evil, what you believe is evil, and you're bad. And I think, but by that same token, and I think this is not just true of Muslim audiences, I think this is a general audience thing that we're all sort of suffering from, is that there's a tendency to sort of shift our expectations and disappointments of the real world onto fiction, and sort of overinvest in these fictional heroes because we don't perceive any heroes in the real world. And that is totally understandable, on an emotional level. Like I get it. I kind of do the same thing. I'm not immune. But it's also, when taken too far, I think becomes dangerous, because it makes us just give up and divorce ourselves from what's going on in the real world and say, well, I cannot affect change, in the real world. So I'm just going to, yeah, I'm just going to focus on this world over here where things are black and white and there are good guys and bad guys and everything makes sense, because I can't make sense of the real world. And I think we have to resist that and remain plugged in, to the real world, because there's stuff that we have to do. Nobody else is going to do it.
That's
Superman isn't coming. Like, I hate to be a bummer,
Even
but
Miss
like
Marvel
it's
isn't
going to be
coming.
us. It has to
Yeah.
be us. It
Miss
has to be
Marvel
us.
isn't coming. I know we're out of
Yes.
time, so give me a minute, Shahid, and we'll wrap it up with the final question. But I want to give a shout out. I see some people here, some authors. Rabia Chaudhry is here. She's come out with the book. There's also Amir Ahmed Nasser, who wrote a nice little message. Thank you for hunting me, Wajahat. I landed a book deal in part thanks to your support and encouragement. Willow had been an inspiration too. Good to be here in this event. Nice to see you, Amir, and others. And I know there's another author here, Ashraf Sufi. The superheroes aren't coming. We often do outsource. We often think the following, and I want to end on this final question to you guys, is I get this question all the time. Wajahat, who am I? I'm nobody. And I always tell people I'm a nobody too. Some of my favorite people are nobodies. And they say, but what they say is, I will hand it to you, Shahid, to conclude after the final question. I promise. He just sent me a message. Is that I don't write for the New York Times. I'm not like Willow. I haven't created, Miss Marvel. I'm not like Sabaa. I'm just an average person. Who am I? I'm nobody. I'm just some Muslim in Cincinnati. I'm some Muslim in Chicago or Michigan, and I want to write my story. Who am I? What can I do? And so, with my final question to you guys is, briefly, what advice would you give to those people who are watching this thinking, I'm a nobody, but I've always wanted to write?
Well, I'll let you go first.
Oh,
Please.
A nobody who writes is a writer, like the most beloved authors of all time we're very ordinary people, if on the face of it. There's no higher power that's going to come and tell you you're a writer. Like, you're a writer when you finish a book and you turn it in. Naguib Mahfouz, speaking of famous Muslim authors, kept his job as a clerk in a government office throughout his entire Nobel laureate career, because that was his job. That was just what kept him going on a day-to-day basis. It was what was getting him a pension. So his whole working life, he remained, a clerk in Cairo. And who else? Oh gosh, no, I'm gonna mess this up. T.S. Eliot, thank you. You read my mind. Yes, kept his similar job at a bank, throughout his whole career. E.M. Forster, one of my very favorite authors, had to sort of go back to working as a secretary when the warehouse containing the entire stock of his book, there were no computers back then, burned to the ground. So he had nothing to sell. So he went off and became a secretary. Like, it's not this reverend place that you hold in society where, like, now you're a writer and you're on a different plane of existence. Real life keeps going. So, when you finish a book and it's something that you're proud of and that you want to put into the world, you are a writer. You don't need anybody's permission. There's no signposts that you need, no check boxes that you need to check. You're a writer if you write. So yeah, don't worry about the other stuff.
Yeah, I would agree with all that. And I would simply add, just start, because you can't, writing requires editing and you can't edit a blank page. Just start writing. Even if what you write feels like garbage to you, it's probably not. There's going to be something in there that is worthwhile. And then you can take that out and then you can sort of massage that and start working with that. Because I think all three of us, there's nothing magic about this. It really is just a stubbornness and hard work and sort of the must keep going way of thinking. That's it. That is the thing that I think separates a writer who maybe gets published from a writer who doesn't. Is like, the writer who gets published is the one who's probably a little bit more stubborn. so just start.
Stubborn and resilient. Before I hand it over to Shahid, the writers also write for a living. So I will do something for Sabaa and Willow, which they won't do, which is very embarrassing. You have to buy Saba's book, All My Rage. It's coming out March 2nd. You can pre-order it now. Willow's, mashallah, collection of books, Butterfly Mosque, Aleph, The Bird King. are all out there ready to be published, and her new novel, alhamdulillah, should probably come out next year. If you have some money left over, buy my book. If you can, support local bookstores. If you want to go through Amazon, I was very lucky. It was Amazon Book of the Month, so they have it 30% off. Spend a couple extra bucks, go to your local bookstore, but you know, it is what it is. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you to Sabaa and Will for taking time, and Shahid, take it away.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Mike. Can you guys see me?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. So I love the fact that before starting this call, we spoke about the need to avoid the usual conversations about Islamophobia and negativity. And this was such a wonderful and positive conversation, not just about writing, but the process and actually being an average person, not necessarily a Muslim person. And something Sabaa said really stuck with me, and that's the Muslim narrative is as rich as the Muslim people, and we need to keep churning out stuff, anything and everything. So I wanted to just close it out by thanking Wajahat Ali, Sabaa Tahir, and G. Willow Wilson. Please remember to support all of these authors, purchase their books, as Wajahat suggested, at your local bookstore. And if that's not convenient, check it out on Amazon. They're all great authors. And to learn more about AMI, check out our website, www.americanmusliminstitution.org. Thank you all and have a good night. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum
Alaikum
assalam.
salam.